Hello, welcome to Module 4 of second week's lectures on Introduction to Dynamical Models in Biology. Earlier, we have discussed about steady states, situation where the dependent variable is not changing with time. In this module, we will learn about stability of steady states. Before we try to understand what do you mean by stability of a steady state, let us recapitulate about steady states. The basic concept of steady state is like this. You have a dependent variable, say x, that is changing with time. So the situation when the dependent variable does not change with time is the steady state of the dependent variable or the steady state of the system. So to get that steady state, what we can do, mathematically we can write, suppose the system is represented by a ODE as given here in the slide, dx dt is equal to function of x and t. So by definition, at a steady state, dx dt will be 0. As dx dt is 0, that means x is not changing with time. To find the value of x for which we have steady state in this system, what do? As we have discussed earlier, we set dx dt is equal to 0. That means function of x and t is equal to 0. This is coming from the ODE that has been defined here. So once I have this f of x and t is equal to 0, then I can solve this one algebraically and find out the value of x for which we will have dx dt equal to 0. So that is our steady state. Now let us try to understand the concept of stability of a steady state. So suppose I have a ODE as given here, dx dt is equal to function of x and t. As I discussed just now, at steady state dx dt will be 0. So let us call the value of x for which dx dt is equal to 0 in this ODE as xss, the steady state value of x, xss. So now suppose the system is at xss. That means right now the value of x is at xss. So the system is in steady state. Our dx dt is 0. Now suppose I slightly pull x away from xss. That means I am here at xss. And suppose I pull it up, the value of x, I pull it up somewhere here. Then the question comes, what will happen to the system as time progresses? Will x come back to its steady state value? Or if I do the opposite thing, I just pull it down, the value of x, I reduce the value of x slightly from xss. So suppose I reduce the value of x slightly to here. This is a small change in x, del x. And then I ask the question, what will happen as time progresses? Will the value of x again go back to xss? So if I have a situation where I disturb the system from its steady state with slight disturbance, we call it perturbation. So if I perturb the system slightly and then allow it to evolve with time, if the system comes back again to the same steady state, we call that steady state as a stable steady state. So as I have written here, if x is perturbed from its steady state value xss, with time, will it return to xss or move away from xss? So this is the question that we ask for stability analysis of a steady state. This type of analysis, this type of question, that if I move away or if I perturb the system slightly from a steady state, will it collapse back to its steady state or it will move away from its steady state, is also important if I want to understand the dynamics or time evolution of x around these steady states. So another purpose of understanding the stability or analyzing the stability of a steady state is to understand the time evolution of x around a steady state. So let us try to understand the stability issues of a ODE based system using this concept. So let us take a specific example. We'll go back to our old example of spread of infectious disease. So the system is represented by a ODE. dx dt is equal to r into x into 1 minus x. If you remember, x is the fraction of population that is infected with the disease. Let us consider r equal to 1. It will be easy for our calculation. And now we will find out first the steady states of the system, and then we will try to understand the issues of stability of the steady state for this system. Let us see. At steady state, by definition, dx dt will be equal to 0. So at steady state, dx dt equal to 0. That means from the ODE given here, I get r into x into 1 minus x is equal to 0. So now r is equal to 1. That means using this relationship, this equation, r into x into 1 minus x equal to 0, it is true if and only if your x is equal to 0 or 1 minus x equal to 0. So both of them are possible, either or. So if I consider 1 minus x equal to 0, then I can use simple algebra to get when 1 minus x equal to 0, I get x equal to 1. So this system has two steady state. XSS, that steady state value of x, is either 0 or and 1. For both the value, the system will be in steady state. So let us try to understand the concept of stability of these two steady states using direction field. If you remember, direction field is nothing but a graphical representation of how the dependent variable changes with time. So to draw direction field, what we require, in the horizontal axis I have plotted time t, in the vertical axis I have plotted x, and now I have divided the whole plane, x versus t plane, in grid points, equidistance grid point, and at each grid point I have drawn an arrow representing the differential derivative dx dt, and I have filled this whole space, whole plane of x versus t with those arrows, so I have a direction field. Now just now we have calculated at x equal to 1 and at x equal to 0 we will have steady state. So let us look into the direction field. At x equal to 0, if you move along the time axis, you will see all arrows are horizontal. That means here along x equal to 0, dx dt is equal to 0. Similarly, at x equal to 1, all arrows are actually horizontal. That's why I have drawn two radius lines to represent that we have steady state at x equal to 1 and x equal to 0, and the direction arrows which represent dx dt are all zeros. Now let us try to understand the concept of stability. Suppose I am at time point 5 here and I am at steady state of x equal to 1. So I am at time point 5 and x equal to 1. So the system is at steady state. I pull x a bit higher and drag it here, slightly high. The question is, if I leave x there and allow to progress with time, evolve with time, what will happen to x? As I see the arrows, as I have pulled the x here, following these arrows, x will fall back on x equal to 1. Let us take another point. Suppose I am somewhere here at time 3, I am here. Now I pull down the value of x slightly here in this point. So now if I leave x, with time x will evolve along this direction field, and ultimately collapse at x equal to 1. So from both the side of x equal to 1, if I perturb the system, that means if I change the value of x slightly higher or slightly lower, with time x will again come back to value of 1. That's why this x equal to 1 steady state is called stable steady state. What is happening? If you disturb a system which is at a stable steady state slightly, then with time again it will come back to that stable steady state. Now let us look into steady state x equal to 0. Suppose right now x is here at time 6 at x equal to 0. I change the value of x slightly higher here. Now if I leave x to evolve with time now, x will follow these arrows and move away from x equal to 0. Suppose I take a value slightly below the original value of x equal to 0. And now if I leave it and allow x to evolve with time or change with time, then following this direction field, x will move in this direction. As you can see in this direction field, the arrows are telling me that if I change value of x slightly away from 0, they will move away from x equal to 0. That means if the system is at steady state with x equal to 0 and now you slightly disturb or perturb the system will not stay at x equal to 0 anymore. It will not come back to x equal to 0 anymore. Rather, it will go away from it. So that's why x equal to 0 is a unstable steady state. So we have defined two things: stable steady state, unstable steady state. In stable steady state, if the system or the dependent variable, if it is at stable steady state, if I perturb it slightly with time, it will again come back to that steady state. Just the opposite for an unstable steady state. If the system or the dependent variable is at a unstable steady state, if you do nothing to it, it will stay at that steady state. But if you perturb it slightly, with time, it will never come back to that steady state anymore. It will diverge away from it. And that's why it is called unstable steady state. Let us explore the direction field further to understand how the dynamics happens between a stable and unstable steady state. Isn't the same problem? As I have shown the direction field here in the graph, I have two lines, reddish colored, representing one unstable steady state, the other one is a stable steady state. So suppose at time equal to 0, I am here, x is here. Then it is slightly away from unstable steady state. As the arrows in the direction field shows, with time x will change and increase and it will move and ultimately will collapse at the steady state, which is stable and whose value is x equal to 1. If I take another point, suppose at t equal to 0, x was 0.5, then following these arrows, the system will again collapse at the stable steady state, x equal to 1. In this particular problem, x can vary from 0 to 1. So any negative value of x does not make any biological sense. Any value of x bigger than 1 also does not make any sense, because we are measuring the fraction of people who are infected with the disease. But mathematically, let us try to analyze further. Suppose I start with the initial value of x somewhere here, slightly below the unstable steady state in this direction field. So with time, x will evolve along these arrows and diverge away from the unstable steady state, and obviously it does not have any other stable steady state on this lower direction, so it will keep on decreasing. Whereas if I start at t equal to 0 at a value higher than 1, then along this direction field arrows, the system will move and eventually collapse at the nearest x equal to 1 steady state, which is a stable steady state. So this graphical analysis shows that by drawing and marking the steady state on the direction field, I can identify, based on the arrows of the direction field, I can identify whether the steady state is a stable one or an unstable one, and I can make a prediction about a time evolution of the dependent variable along this direction field from an unstable to a stable steady state. Now let us look into another way of analyzing and identifying stability of steady states. So let us take the same example, dx dt equal to r into x into 1 minus x. We have considered r equal to 1 for simplicity. What we will do here, we will draw a table with 4 columns. First column will represent the value of x. The second column is the derivative of x as given by the ODE. Then the third column is for the sign of the derivative. And then we'll have a column for arrow. I will explain what type of arrow we will put here. One important issue of doing this type of analysis is that I have 3 rows. The middle row represents a particular steady state value. On the upper row, just above the steady state value row, you take a value slightly bigger than the steady state value that you have taken in the middle row. And in the lower one here, you can take a value slightly smaller than the steady state value. Let us see with examples. So if you remember, just now in few slides back, we have calculated that we have 2 steady states for this system, x equal to 0 and x equal to 1. So let us start analyzing x equal to 0 first. So I have a table here with 4 columns, 3 rows. In the middle row, I put the steady state value of x. This is my x steady state, that is 0. Obviously, the dx dt for this x equal to 0 is 0. And it doesn't make any sense of talking of sign of 0. But I put an arrow which is horizontal here. Horizontal because we know that from direction field concept, the arrows in direction field when the derivative is 0 is horizontal. So you have a horizontal arrow here. Now let us take a slightly higher value of x, which is slightly higher than the steady state value. The steady state value is 0. I have taken a slightly higher value, that is 0.1. So if I put this 0.1 in place of x in this differential equation, I get dx dt is equal to 0.09. The sign of this derivative is positive. So I put an arrow pointing up. That means dx dt is saying that x will increase. So I put an arrow up as shown here. Let us now take a slightly lower value of x, from slightly lower than the steady state value of 0. So slightly lesser than 0 is here minus 0.1. I again use this ODE to calculate dx dt, r equal to 1, r into minus 0.1 into 1 minus minus 0.1. If you do the calculation, you will see dx dt is minus 0.11. So if x equal to minus 0.1, using the ODE given above, I get the derivative is equal to minus 0.11. The sign of the derivative is negative. And as the sign is negative, that means it is saying x is decreasing with time. That's why I put an arrow down. So now once you have made this table, focus on this this column of arrows. This is your steady state arrow. And you have 2 arrows, one is pointing down, one is pointing up. That means with time, if you disturb x, then with time, x will move away from 0. So as both these arrows are moving away from steady state, as both the arrows are moving away from steady state, this steady state is unstable. This is a simple way of understanding the stability or calculating the stability of a steady state without drawing the complete direction field. As you understand, to draw the complete direction field, you have to draw lots of arrows. Here we are only calculating the arrows and their directionality near the steady state. Let us try for the next steady state. If you remember, another steady state for this ODE is x equal to 1. So I put in the middle row x equal to 1. dx dt, the derivative of that will be obviously equal to 0. And I put an arrow which is horizontal here because dx dt is 0. Now I will take a value slightly higher than 1. So what I can take? I have taken x equal to 1.1. That means dx dt is equal to 1. R is 1 into 1.1 into 1 minus 1.1. So this gives me a value of minus 0.11. So that value is written here. The sign of the derivative is negative. So with time x is decreasing. So I put an arrow indicating downwards. Let us take a slightly smaller value than the steady state value. Steady state is 1. So I take a smaller value 0.9. So then in this case dx dt will be equal to 1, that is r, into x is 0.9 into 1 minus 0.9. So this is equal to 0.09. So you have 0.09 here in this column. As the sign of this derivative is positive, that is written here. As the sign is positive, that means with time x will increase. So our arrow in the arrow column is a up one. So what we have? I have a horizontal arrow for the steady state. One arrow, slightly lower value of x. I have an arrow pointing towards this one. And I have another arrow pointing downwards to this one. So that means in this case, both these arrows are pointing towards the steady state. So for both the arrows, for higher and lower value of x, are pointing towards the steady state. That means this steady state is a stable steady state. Again, I have not drawn the complete direction field. Rather, I have calculated the derivative and the direction of the arrows just near a particular steady state and have tried to decipher the stability of that steady state. This is much simpler than drawing the complete direction field and analyzing it. In this way, you can analyze the stability of any steady state. The trick is first identify the all possible steady state and then make this table for each steady state and see the sign of the arrows around the horizontal one, that is the steady state one. If both the arrow point towards the steady state, then it is a stable one. If both the arrow point away from the steady state, then it is an unstable one. There is another way of looking at and analyzing the stability and representing it graphically. For example, here what I have shown, plot x versus dx dt. That means in the vertical axis you put dx dt, the derivative of x, and in the horizontal axis you put x. So now in this plane I can draw the ODE, that is r into dx dt equal to r into x into 1 minus x. So this is the function of x. So I can plot it. The plot I have shown this one. This blue line is this curve. So this is nothing but r into x into 1 minus x, where r equal to 1. I have taken r equal to 1 to draw this one. Now, what is steady state in this curve? See, we know dx dt is equal to 0 at steady state. Dx dt is 0 along this horizontal line. In all this line, horizontal line axis, dx dt is equal to 0. So that means at all the point where this blue curve intersect the horizontal line, or the horizontal axis, are the steady state. So the one intersection point is this one. The red dot I have shown. The other intersection point is this one. And you can see easily this first intersection point, this one is nothing but 1, 0. 1 is the value of x and 0 is the value of dx dt. The other intersection point is at 0, 0. When x equal to 0, dx dt is also 0. So just looking at this graph, I can identify the number of intersection point where the ODE, the curve representing the ODE, is intersecting the axis for x, and those are my steady state. Then I can do the similar calculation the way I did in the previous slides, that I take a value slightly bigger than a steady state. For example, let us take this one, 1, 0. So I take a small value of suppose 1.50, and then I calculate what is the derivative at that value of derivative that time, dx dt at that point. So obviously that will be negative. As you can see, 1.5 is bigger than 1. So 1 minus 1.5 will be negative. So it will be pointing towards the steady state as x will decrease with time. Similarly, I can take a point slightly before the steady state, that is a lesser value than 1, and I can calculate dx dt there. And based on the sign of that, I can easily see the sign will be positive. That means x will increase with time. So I put a arrow towards the steady state. So as both the arrows are pointing towards the steady state 1, 0, I call this as a stable steady state. You can do the equivalent thing for 0, 0 point. This is also steady state. So I take a value slightly bigger than x equal to 0 and calculate dx dt there. And the sign of that dx dt you can easily see. Say for example x equal to 0.1. You can check it. X equal to 0.1 will give a dx dt positive. That means my arrow will point like this. X will increase with time. Whereas if I take a smaller value of x, say minus 0.2 or something like this, and if I again calculate dx dt using the ODE r into x into 1 minus x, I will get a negative sign. So the arrow points to lower value of x. So as I can see, for 0, 0 point, both the arrows are moving away from 0, 0. This is my unstable steady state. This method of graphical representation is good because by the number of intersection point, I can easily identify how many possible steady states are there. If I have ordinary differential equation, something like this, suppose I have ordinary differential equation dx dt is function of x, and if I plot dx dt in the vertical axis and x in the horizontal axis, and then if I plot this function, and suppose I have the function is like this, that means I have 1, 2, 3, 4 intersection point. That means this system has 4 steady states. So this type of representation in dx dt versus x plane is very good to identify number of possible steady state. But you have to remember that you have to be able to plot the function properly in this plane. Let us now move into another type of stability. We have discussed stable steady state, unstable steady state. What if we have a mixture of both? Can there be? Let us take this example given here. The ODE is dx dt is equal to x plus 1 whole square. I can easily calculate the steady state. Let us put dx dt equal to 0. That means x plus 1 is equal to 0. So x is equal to minus 1. So the steady state is minus 1. I want to check its stability. I will take the numerical route rather than plotting the direction field. What do you need? You have to make a table the way I have shown here. 4 column, 3 rows. First column is for x, second column is for the derivative, third one is for the sign, and the fourth one is the arrow. In the middle row, I put the value of the steady state, that is minus 1. Obviously, if x equal to minus 1, dx dt will be 0, so I put a horizontal arrow. Let us now take a slightly higher value. Remember, the higher value, the value slightly greater than the steady state will be in the first row. So I have taken minus 0.9, and you can easily calculate. So dx dt is equal to minus 0.9 plus 1 whole square. So the value is 0.01, and obviously the sign will be positive because you have a square term. So you have positive sign. So I can put the arrow representing up. Whereas if I take 1.1 minus 1.1, slightly lower value than x equal to 1, again, although the value of x is minus 1.1, as we have a square term, x plus 1 square term, what we will get? We will get a positive value. We can calculate it easily. For example, dx dt is equal to minus 1.1 plus 1 whole square, so that will be 0.1 whole square, and you will get this value. So obviously this is positive value, and the arrow will be pointing up. So in this way, you can see here, this is the horizontal arrow representing the steady state. Two arrows, slightly lower value of x, slightly higher value of x, one is pointing towards the steady state, another one is going away from the steady state. So in this case, if you approach from the one side, you will reach towards the steady state. If you start from another side, you will go away from the steady state. So this type of system is semi-stable. Let us look into the direction field of this. I have t in this axis, x in this axis. What we have plotted? We have plotted the arrows. The arrowhead has not been given to keep it clear. This has only one steady state, that is minus 1. So I have drawn a dotted line here. If you start from a lower value than the steady state, suppose this minus 1.5, the arrow says that you will move along these and collapse at the steady state. But if you start at a slightly higher value, say suppose somewhere here, then you will move along these and go away. So if I start from the lower value, I collapse at the steady state. If I start from a higher value, I move away from it. So from one side, it has stable type behavior. From the other side, it has an unstable behavior. That's why this is called semi-stable steady state. Now let us look into the same system in dx dt versus x plot. So my equation is dx dt is equal to x plus 1 whole square. I have plotted x in the horizontal axis, dx dt in the vertical axis, and this curve represents x plus 1 whole square. So you can see this curve is intersecting the horizontal axis, at the axis for x, only at one point, that is minus 1, 0. That means this system has only one steady state. I can take a smaller value than minus 1, and then I can calculate the dx dt. As the dx dt is positive, so it is moving towards it. I can take a bigger value of x and calculate dx dt there. Obviously the dx dt is positive, so x is increasing with time, so my arrow is in this direction. So one arrow is moving towards the steady state, one is moving away from the steady state. So this one is semi-stable. So it is a semi-stable steady state. Let us now jot down what we have learned here. We have seen that steady state can be of three types: stable, unstable, and semi-stable. Stability analysis also helps us to understand how the system or the dependent variable will evolve with time around the steady state. If you have a stable steady state, and if you start near that stable steady state, you will collapse at that stable steady state. If you are at a stable steady state and if you perturb the system slightly, it will again come back and collapse at that stable steady state. If you are at an unstable steady state, if I perturb the system, it will move away from that steady state. In case of semi-stable one, if you are near the steady state, from one side you can reach the steady state, and if you are on the other side of the steady state, with time you will move away from it. We have shown three methods of understanding and analyzing the steady state stabilities. One method is using the direction field. You draw the direction field x versus t plot with the arrows showing the direction field, and then you see how the arrows are moving towards the steady state. Are they moving towards the steady state or they are moving away? A shortened version of that is numerical method, the way I have discussed it in a tabular form. That is much easier to do because you have not to draw the whole direction field. So I always advise to do that because it is very easy to execute, and from that you can easily decipher whether a particular steady state for a ODE is stable, unstable or semi-stable. In some cases, you may like to plot the dx dt versus x plot and then draw the function representing the ODE there, and the curve will intersect the horizontal axis, that the axis for x, in one or less or more time. So depending upon the intersection point, number of intersection point, you have so many steady state, and you can similarly analyze the stability of the steady state at each of these position, calculating the dx dt around it, the sign of dx dt around it. That's all for this module. We will continue discussing about steady state and stability issues further. Thank you.